Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would give my little fight analysis and my little fight breakdown of the very decent fight and the very big fight that ended up happening this weekend, that, of course, was in that of the men's boxing circuit. And this, of course, is going to be my fight review of the Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson unification fight that ended up happening at 130 pounds. And, of course, for those of you that did not end up hearing the results. Mr. Shakur Stevenson, pretty much like I predicted, did end up winning this fight, and he ended up winning this fight pretty much how I said he was going to win this fight, by using his jab, by using his lead hand, by using that left straight down the pipe, also the left hand to the body, hooks around the guard as well, which is, you can tell that when it comes to Mr. Shakur Stevenson, that he tries to employ certain Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Terrence Bud Crawford tactics. And I think that Shakur Stevenson, that he really showed that he is a high grade talented fighter in this fight. I think that Oscar Valdez, I think that he showed a lot of heart, and I think that Oscar Valdez, that he showed that, he probably is the biggest challenge, so far in Shakur Stevenson's career by far. Because I think I would have gave Oscar Valdez a good 3, maybe 4 rounds in this fight, which is pretty much what I predicted. I predicted that Shakur Stevenson, in my view, that he probably was going to win this fight about 9 rounds to 3, 8 rounds to 4. In my fight prediction, I believe I stated that anyway. But anyways, when it came down to it, this fight pretty much went down how like I predicted it would. Oscar Valdez, even for the talented fighter that he is, unfortunately, I just think that Shakur Stevenson, at least for Oscar Valdez's side, unfortunately for Mr. Oscar Valdez, not only overall do I believe that he was facing a fighter that was more talented than what he was, not only in terms of certain skill sets and maybe even in terms of certain athletic gifts, but also in terms of the strategy. I don't think that Oscar Valdez, in my opinion, came in with the right strategy whatsoever. Now, Canelo Alvarez told him overall that in this fight that he would have to pick his shots, and I understand picking your shots to a degree, but I think that Oscar Valdez, I think that he did a little bit too much of that here. When you have a fighter that is as swift and as great of a boxer, with the foot speed and the footwork and the hand speed, and on top of that, he's lengthier and taller than you and just naturally bigger, which he obviously was in this fight, and that is not me trying to detract from Shakur Stevenson's win. That's just me, stating that he obviously was the lengthier fighter, at least by a little bit. When you have a fighter like that, you can't try to outbox them and outpeck them unless you're an extraordinary boxer at that when it comes down to if you're the greater athlete. And Oscar Valdez, even though he had the greater power in this fight, he's not a person, that was that of the greater athlete. He's also not a person that, in my opinion, was that of the superior boxer. And on top of that, he did not have any length, he did not have any height, he did not have any reach overall over Shakur Stevenson. In my opinion, Oscar Valdez, he did good compared to some of the other fighters that Shakur Stevenson has fought. But Oscar Valdez very clearly got dominated in this fight. And it was very clear to me that Oscar Valdez, that it was very clear that, in my view, that he thought that he was going to lose to Shakur Stevenson probably a very long time ago. Because when I took a look at his face, it was very clear that he was nervous, and that when I took a look at some of the things that he was complaining about and a certain amount of other things, I don't think that Oscar Valdez ever expected to win this fight. I think that he was hoping to win this fight, but some of the things that I heard him say, some of the energy that I seen him with, Oscar Valdez basically knew that more than likely that Shakur Stevenson was going to win this fight. And I just think that Oscar Valdez, that he tried to pick his shots, that he tried to be in the mid-range overall, basically with Shakur Stevenson way too much. And one of the commentators said something that I thought was very, very decently intelligent, something that Oscar Valdez should have done in this fight. Basically, what Oscar Valdez should have done is that he needed to be either inside of Shakur Stevenson's range or moving in and out and using his feet more. Now, Oscar Valdez, in my opinion, he does have good footwork, but he did not really utilize his foot movement to the best of his ability. And Oscar Valdez is a person to where he is a very good counterpuncher. He's a very sharp counterpuncher, but he was going to have to do things in this fight that I really did not see him do prior, at least to the degree of what he was going to need to do. He was going to have to move around Shakur Stevenson. He also was going to have to get on the inside and overall try to pressure him. And sometimes when Oscar Valdez did go in on Shakur Stevenson, he was successful. There were certain times where he hit him with right hands that Shakur Stevenson even would get hit with repeatedly. There were certain times to where it looked like maybe he even got hit with 3 right hands in a row in one of those rounds. But at the end of the day, Oscar Valdez, he just did not do enough to win this fight. In my view, he had the completely wrong strategy. He needed to use his jab in this fight. He needed to try to jab to his body, jab to his head. He needed to try to use a double jab, stick that jab in his face, kind of like what Shakur Stevenson was doing to him. He really did not use his jab whatsoever. And maybe that was because maybe Oscar Valdez, he's just not a person that utilizes the jab probably as much as he needs to, or maybe it was because he was somewhat, I'm not going to say disinterested, that's not the right word, but maybe he was discouraged overall to use it because he saw how quick and how snappy Shakur Stevenson's jab was, and maybe he felt that he needed to keep his guard up the whole entire time and kind of plod in there. But in order to beat a fighter like this overall, really to win a fight in general, and I stated this in my fight prediction, whoever overall was going to use their jab more effectively, more than likely was going to win this fight. And I had a feeling that it was going to be Shakur Stevenson. Shakur has one of the best jabs in the business, in my view. He's very quick. He's very snappy. He's a person all in all that has extreme speed. Not only extreme speed, but he's he has very great foot speed. And on top of that, he just has excellent timing, excellent counterpunching ability. And even though Oscar Valdez, I believe that he's an A-grade fighter as well, he's just not on the same level as what a Shakur Stevenson is. And he proved that in this fight. He proved that in this fight. He did not have the right strategy. He did not have the same talent. He did not have the same athleticism. He did not have the same skill set as what a Shakur Stevenson had. So congratulations to Mr. Shakur Stevenson. I think that he employed the right strategy. He showed that he is a multi-dimensional fighter. I believe that Oscar Valdez is somewhat of a multi-dimensional fighter as well, but I just think that Shakur Stevenson is on a completely whole nother level. It just is what it is. Oscar Valdez pretty much got embarrassed in this fight. He had his moments in the fight. Like I said, I don't know if it was as wide as what Andre Ward had scored it, but Shakur Stevenson very clearly won this fight. Like I said, I think at the most, if you really wanted to, maybe you could give Oscar Valdez 4 rounds in this fight, but even that is pushing it. Even that is pushing it. But Oscar Valdez won about 3 to 4 rounds in this fight, which is pretty much what I predicted. Shakur, in my opinion, was just too good for him. He utilized his feet better, his foot movement better, his foot speed and his hand speed advantage very clearly showed up here. Oscar had the complete wrong strategy here. If you're going to beat Shakur Stevenson, in my view, you were overall going to have to move around or go inside his distance. You were going to have to make this an ugly fight. And I think that Oscar Valdez learned that a little bit too late. A lot of the times, especially within the first 5 rounds, he was trying to pick his shots. He was trying to time Shakur Stevenson with certain counters, which is not always a bad thing. But what Oscar needed to do, in my opinion, is shoot that right hand, down to the body a hell of a lot more. Shoot that jab down to the body as well as up to the head. Try to trap him in the corner. Roughhouse him a little bit on the inside if you can overall. But the problem is with Oscar as well sometimes is that sometimes he leads with hooks. And if you're overall a fighter that repeatedly overall likes to lead in with hooks, sometimes it's easier for those fighters, especially that like to use the good old 1-2 to counter you because, of course, usually overall a straight punch is going to be quicker than that of a leading hook, but it just is what it is. Oscar needed to use his jab more in this fight. He didn't do it. He also needed to go to the body a little bit more earlier on in this fight and have the courage to go in on Shakur Stevenson and make this a rough and dirty tough fight like what Roberto Duran did against Sugar Ray Leonard in the first fight, or what Sugar Ray Leonard did against Tommy Hearns overall in their fight, or overall what some other fighters have done in the past against fighters that maybe had certain athletic or even maybe certain skill set gifts over them. What Sugar Ray Leonard had to do against Tommy Hearns, he realized that Tommy Hearns was winning the fight. He realized that Tommy Hearns had a greater reach than him, that all in all, that he seemed to be the more physically talented fighter. And he realized that if I don't go in here, and if I overall don't try to break this guy down incrementally, put my guard up, and try to make this a rough and dirty fight, I'm not going to outbox this guy from the outside. This guy's longer than me. He's just as fast as me. He's a person that is very decently strong. I have to make this a rough and tough, dirty fight. Same thing that Roberto Duran did with Sugar Ray Leonard. All right? It's the same thing there. There's certain fighters that you cannot try to outpeck or outbox in the middle of the ring, and Oscar Valdez needed to learn that here. He didn't learn it. It is what it is. Anyways, moving on overall, when it comes down to it, just to get down to the bottom line, congratulations to Mr. Shakur Stevenson. This may now place him within my at least debatable top 10 pound per pound list. I said that the winner of this fight was going to be within my debatable top 10 pound per pound list because I don't know if either Oscar or Shakur would have been within my top 15 exactly 100% anyway, but you can now debate them, in my view, in my top 10 pound per pound list. I would not put Shakur Stevenson, at least Shakur Stevenson, is on my debatable top 10 pound per pound list, not Oscar, of course, at the moment. But Shakur Stevenson, he now debatably has to be within my top 10 pound per pound. He now debatably has to be somewhere within that 10 to 8 range, somewhere around there. Now, some of you may ask, well, why don't you put him higher? Because I need to see Shakur Stevenson against fighters that, in my view, are really going to challenge him to a great deal. Now, some of you may say, well, what are you talking about? Why would Oscar Valdez not challenge him to a great degree? And even though I think, all in all, that he certainly does, I think Oscar Valdez was a person where it certainly proved that Shakur Stevenson was an A-grade fighter. The fighters that I'm really going to be concerned about with Shakur Stevenson facing and going into that top fight pound per pound are going to be the Devin Haney's, the Vasily Lomachenkos, the Gervonta Tank Davises, maybe even that of the Ryan Garcias, because these are going to be the fighters that, in my view, not only maybe in some terms of skills, I'm not saying that every fighter that I just mentioned is on the same level of skill as Shakur Stevenson, but once you get into the ring with some fighters like a Vasily Lomachenko or Gervonta Tank Davis, certain fighters that have greater power over than what you're probably used to and kind of have around the same size, same length as you. Because in my opinion, it was clear that Shakur was the slightly bigger man. It just is what it is, not only in terms of length, but it even looked like in terms of weight as well. So it just is what it is. And on top of that, the one fault that I'll say with Shakur, which is the one fault that I said pops up here and there about Shakur, sometimes he does tend to keep his guard a little bit too low. Kind of like kind of like his mentor in a way, Terrence Bud Crawford. That is one weakness that you notice about Terrence Bud Crawford in his game. Sometimes overall he keeps his hands down a little bit too low. And what's the main punch over that Terrence Crawford usually gets hit by? It's usually the right cross, or it's usually a right hand, which is what Shakur Stevenson was. That was pretty much the only punch that he was getting hit with repeatedly in this fight. So hopefully Shakur Stevenson, hopefully overall, he ends up getting more big fights later on down the line. I would love to see him in a fight against Gervonta Tank Davis or Vasily Lomachenko, maybe Ryan Garcia, seeing overall maybe what Ryan Garcia can do. We'll see a little bit later on. Of course, he does still look a little bit, uncooked, but, he still looks like a fighter that maybe could provide some of the top guys, maybe at least a little bit of a challenge. Devin Haney as well. Who knows? Maybe Shakur one day will go up to 140 as well. Shakur has a very, very bright future, and I'm very just excited to see him in future fights, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, great performance by Shakur Stevenson. Overall, should be very proud of that performance, especially in the biggest fight of his career. We'll also see where Mr. Oscar Valdez goes from here. Where do I think he should go from here? Well, I'm not necessarily sure. Oscar could go, in a multitude of ways. Maybe he could face Jamel Herring. Maybe he could face, Robson Conseco in a rematch. Maybe he could do a couple of other fights. I'm not necessarily sure, But Shakur Stevenson, from what I heard, apparently he plans to completely unify the 130-pound division, which he pretty much can after this. I don't see another fighter there that, in my view, is going to be anywhere near a threat to Shakur Stevenson. I don't really know anyone else besides those two at the current moment at 130 pounds. The real challenges, in my opinion, for Shakur are going to pop up at either 135 or 140. The Vasily Lomachenkos, the Gervonta Tank Davises, the Devin Haney's. I would say maybe George Kambosos, but in my view, George Kambosos, he's not on their level. It just is what it is. I think that he got a great win over Teofimo because I think that he was not only a tough stop for Teofimo, but I don't think that Teofimo took him 100% seriously. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see where both of these guys go from here. Congratulations to Mr. Shakur Stevenson. That's pretty much all I have to say for today. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.